We'll start. Those of you who are absolutely meticulous with your programs will know that this should be Jo Cook standing here chairing you this afternoon, but I'm not as pretty as Jo, and unfortunately she's sick. So I should have been doing your tweeting this afternoon. My name's Nick Laycock, so instead I'm chairing, and I'm expecting to have the easiest chairing job I've ever had, because these guys are going to facilitate themselves, which is absolutely wonderful. Can I introduce to you Martin Couzins on one side, Sam Burrough on this side. It's the contentious story of the MOOC, and let's have some fun. Off you go.
Okay, hi. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Thanks for staying and not going home early. So I hope everyone has a safe journey home and can stay as long as possible. We'll try and make sure that we do finish a bit early, because I know it's the last session of the day and everyone's probably quite tired. But hopefully you're all interested in MOOCs, and that's why you're here. We think it's a very interesting topic, but we think it's also one which is deeply misunderstood. There's no shortage of controversy around it, and we would like to help you explore some of those ideas today. And it's really in two parts, this session. The first part will be MOOC myth-busting, so looking at some of the ideas around them and examining how much truth there is in those. And in the second half, we'll be looking on a more practical level, well, how might you actually create a MOOC, or perhaps a MOOC-like experience, and why might you want to do that? So I shall hand you over to Martin.
I'm going to quickly come over here.
Yeah, sure, you go.
Now, we didn't say who we are, actually, so maybe we should quickly say that. What brings us here? So Sam and we're just starting our third MOOC on Monday, and I don't know if it's reasonable to say, I liken us to mechanics. We design and build MOOCs, okay? So we get our hands dirty on this stuff. So the thinking for the next 3/4 of an hour is going to be based on our practical experience. So let's go then. Shall I take that? Yep. So we've got to the end of day 2. Well done, everyone. I'm delighted you got here. So it would make sense to have a quick think about what you might be taking back to your organisations after these 2 days. So I'm just quite interested in the types of, I don't know, topics, trends, ideas, technology, whatever it might be that you think actually that's been useful, and I'm going to go and look at that a bit further. So can we just shout some out, because I want to write some down. Video learning.
Learning gap? Yeah, apps. Learning apps, right, sorry.
Wearables.
Self-led learning.
Yeah. Anything else stood out to you? Anything that you want to go back and try on Monday?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness? Setting care and experiencing doing it.
Virtual classrooms.
Adaptive learning.
Social.
Adaptive learning is
Adaptive.
adaptive.
Yeah.
Great. Should I just leave that there? Because the only reason I wanted to do that is to... So I have to stand by this microphone, so I'm going to not walk around. And I'll add 2 more that I thought were quite interesting, if that's okay. And one was Robert Winston saying that learning and collaboration are inextricably linked, and that one brain is finite. So there's something very compelling about having more than one brain working on something in order to learn. And Sugata Mitra, however, he's quite a Marmite character. He's quite radical in his thinking, but he asked the question at the end of his talk, which was, are we using an obsolete engine to drive a new car? And I think that's quite an interesting question for all that we do. But the reason looking at that is because MOOCs, are they misunderstood? I'd say some of this stuff, just lodge that in your head, because my first half of this talk is about thinking about what this actually means and our kind of mindset around what a MOOC is. And I think that some of that list might resonate with what we might be talking about when it comes to MOOCs. So what is a MOOC? I think we all know it to be a massive open online course, yeah? Is anyone unsure about that?
Until I walked in and spoke to the gentleman, I had no idea what MOOCs were. Science learning, science books were very closed down in the whole. So I'm here today to stretch my mind a little bit and find out what this is.
Great. That's good. Now, where are my acronyms? Are they coming up?
Yes.
Great. So, a MOOC is a massive open online course. Now, it's great that you've come here. Well, more than one of you is kind of like, I don't know what this is. And then, how many more? Oh, back. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to blind you with science. And this makes my point really nicely. So, does anyone know what a doc is? Or
Distributed online certificates.
Close, very close. Distributed open collaborative course.
now we were going to have a sort of buzzword bingo on this, and you could have won a prize. But we decided to just opt for this option to quickly sort of make the point that we've. I'm not going to go through all of them actually, because the point here is that it's an acronym. This is L&D, and we're very, very comfortable with acronyms. But there's a lot of variance around this. But what we're trying to get to is what on earth are we talking about when we talk about a MOOC? What does it represent?
Should we just maybe explain a couple of... Does anyone know what it is? I don't know what MOOC is. I guess maybe something I'm really
Is it relevant to know?
Yeah, well, yeah. Because people are using this language, marketing people mostly, and it's part of what is confusing. Part of what is confusing everything. So you're getting all these different acronyms. So VOOCs, XMOOCs, CMOOCs. An XMOOC is your typical, the most mainstream thing, the kind of Coursera, edX. These are the big platforms which, if you've taken MOOCs, you may have experienced yourself. The X is in the sense of TEDx, which is extended, so it's an extended experience from the university experience. The CMOOC is the collaborative MOOCs, which is more social in nature, and you collaborate with the people on the MOOC. So connectivist or collaborative, depending which way we go. And vocational is the BOOC. The BOOC is just big, open online course, totally unnecessary. And the SMOC, I have to remind myself of that.
Small private online course. So this I want to walk. So the SMOC. So there's the big online open course, and then we made up our own one, which is the Fluke, and we think that that's what we do. We do fairly large online courses and open online courses, and the SPOC is potentially coming to an organisation near you or to your organisation, because organisations like FutureLearn, who are the MOOC platform for the Open University, are doing small private online courses. So basically they're using their platform to deliver bespoke courses for organisations, and they see that as I don't know how big a revenue channel, but these platform providers, these MOOC platform providers, are looking to make money, and organisations are absolutely in the mix for making the money. So in terms of what a MOOC is, I want to make sure that a MOOC is a massive open online course. It's basically some technology that enables lots of people to come together, to consume content, talk around it. They can get certificated, but that's essentially what it is. Okay, so that's the premise. And then these are all the variants. And a lot of those variants are talked about in higher education, so they're very educational focused. But you'll come across them, and it's useful to go and look them up. But if you put MOOC acronyms in Google, you'll get to them all, and you can go and explore them. So, in terms of our mindset and our understanding of what a MOOC stands for, I thought it might be useful to just have a little bit of discussion on each table. Now, in the middle of each table, and I'm going to have to bring one to you guys at the back, is a myth with a question mark, because I'm not so sure it's a myth, it's a statement really. And what I'd like you to do is just have a discussion on your table about what you think about that statement, and then we're going to just have a little bit of feedback on that. So I'm not suggesting it's a myth or whether it's true or whether it's false, it's just a statement about MOOCs. Thank you very much. Sorry to stop the conversation. Right, I'm just going to call out one of the myths. And if you just put your hand up wherever you are, and you can, someone on the table can just let us know what you've been saying about that particular myth or statement. So, MOOCs are too large to navigate. The myth is MOOCs are too large to navigate. So lots of them are very big, with tens of thousands of students on. So what do you think about
So
that?
we didn't think so. For the three of the people who had used MOOCs before, we said no, it's using the larger ones, so the Coursera's, the Future Learns. The content is laid out in a way that it's easy to find relevant courses to sign up for. My one observation is MOOCs are good at delivering individual courses, not necessarily packages of courses. So you see websites like Slide Rule where now people are actually going to the MOOCs and picking out the big, good content and the good courses and putting them together. Like for instance, the MBA for Free program, where you now have content curators curating the content curators.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. So, subjects are more higher education focused than business focused. Who can tell us about that?
Hello. We had varying experiences really, so from doing very practical courses on the table through to very traditional sort of push higher education courses. So I think our experience was a mixture. So the statement was subjects are more higher education focused than business focused. Well, our range of experience on the table would say that isn't the case.
Right, okay, great. Thanks very much. Well, I think we had another table looking at that. Do you want to,
Our answer is yes.
Great. So, yes, they are more higher education focused than business focused, and a mix on that table. So, third one, low completion rates, that's something that is said, it's levelled at MOOCs, is that there are completion rates around 5%. Low completion rates suggest MOOCs are not successful. Who was discussing that?
To speak on that?
We kind of felt that in the same way that a lot of e-learning, where you track completion rates, I'm not necessarily getting to whether or not people are getting the answers they want to get out of it. MOOCs may well be successful for the end recipient, though if you are running them, it could be quite distressing if you've got 20,000 on day one and you're down to a handful, a few hundred by the end of it. But my experience certainly of having dropped out of many MOOCs is that by the time you drop out, you're not aware that the numbers have gone. So a lot of the way they're designed, particularly on like the Coursera platforms, they do adapt to falling numbers quite fluidly, so that you don't necessarily experience a terrible experience as a user.
Great. Thanks very much. I think there was another table who were discussing that.
I think so. The low completion rates suggest MOOCs are not successful. We said yes and no, because I think a lot of times people drop out once they've got the information that they need. I think it means that people, if they're not sure whether they're interested in something, it means that they can try it out for a bit and work out whether it's something that they are interested in, so they might start and then leave. So it means that people can try new things that they might not have been able to. But then on the flip side, we did say that perhaps it does mean they're unsuccessful because people don't have the commitment to it because they're not being charged for things and things like that. So then we spoke a bit about the certificate levels.
Great, thanks very much. So the next one was MOOC certification lacks credibility.
I suppose it's just like any award or certification. It's, were you doing the work? And if wherever you're taking that certification, do they understand what the MOOC was, or the sort of the awarding body, or the university if you're on Coursera, you know, the program. So sometimes it's you've put a lot of work in there and nobody else is in the same sort of area you are. But it really comes down to sort of identification where you're doing all the work through the whole MOOC.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, great. Thanks very much. Did anyone else discuss that? Great.
So we felt that with some platforms that the certification wasn't necessarily linked to the quality of the work, it was more about sort of ticking off the steps. So I guess in that sense it could lack credibility, but yeah, to a certain extent, but that's not necessarily why some people join to do MOOCs. So, you know, does it matter?
Good question. So the final one, only highly motivated learners get any benefits from MOOCs. Who was...
The answer is no. Who are we to judge? No, there's so many offerings, and this is one of them, and depending on your personal need, many ways to find information. MOOCs is one of them. So if you're highly motivated, maybe you make it to the end. If you're low motivated, you look at the introduction, and again, if that's enough, then it's enough.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, we basically thought that if you're highly motivated, yes, you might get through to the end. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get any benefit, and it might not mean that if you don't get to the end, you won't get any benefit. So I think somebody could just go into a MOOC, pick the thing that they wanted to learn, and then that's it. That's all they want to do.
Great. Well, look, thanks very much for your thinking and reflection and discussion on that. The reason I think it's important, excuse me, is that what happens if we weren't talking about MOOCs and we just replace that with corporate learning? That'd be quite interesting, I think, based on what everyone has just said. So just hold that thought. So, how are you using MOOCs? Now, Sam and I have this idea that there are 4 ways in which we can use MOOCs usefully. Excuse me, must be all that fresh air I've had over the last 2 days. Personal learning, what we're calling curating MOOCs for others, applying MOOC approaches, and running MOOCs. Now, I just want to quickly go through each one of these, and I want to be thinking about this in terms of current practice, in terms of learning delivery in your organisation versus what a MOOC does or can do. And I think there's already been quite an interesting set of thinking around the potential in this kind of technology for learning. So the first one is personal learning. Now, can I just have a show of hands of anyone who has taken a MOOC? Wow. Okay, so stick your hand up keep your hand up rather, if you've taken a MOOC and you've completed a MOOC. Now, I was expecting at this point for there to be virtually no one, and now I'm amazed. And now I need to ask one of you, and I don't mind, keep your hands up if you have. We just need to pick on one of you, and I just need to ask, I need you to answer me a couple of questions, so I don't mind who it is. But the question is, firstly, what was it? And what was the experience like? That's... Who would like to share that?
A question, please, Martin.
What was the MOOC that you took, and what was, just very briefly, what was the experience like for you? How valuable was it for you?
It was about innovation of learning, and it was very valuable. New ideas, new insights, and fun to do.
And did it take much time?
Not that much time.
Okay, so park that. Now can I ask you, how does that compare with other learning that you might pay for, where you go to find out other stuff? So if you were to do that in another more traditional way, how does it stack up? Is it as good, or?
Yes, I could choose it to do or to spend time whenever I liked, whenever it fitted in my agenda. So that was nice, and so it was better than the alternative, I guess.
All right, great. Thanks, Go. So, I mean, lots of you have done it or are doing it. So it feels like I'm slightly preaching to the converted here. But at the very least, as L&D professionals, we should be thinking about looking at what's out there in terms of our own development, because there is some very valuable content and it's free. And my question would be, why wouldn't you do that? And it would appear that it's quite valuable, and I don't know if that's the same for other people that have completed MOOCs, but I think the personal learning aspect of this is really important. So that's number one. Now, number two, curating and connecting. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about us being the people that select MOOCs for others to go to suggest MOOCs to other people. So you can put your hands up if you're doing that in your organisation. Great. Can I ask? I was going to say pick on someone. Can I ask someone to just answer a couple of questions? Would you like to do that? That'd be great. So, how's that working? What are you typically doing currently?
So we have launched a site for our leaders, an online site for all of our leaders, and we've got 9 leadership capabilities or attributes. So we went out and did some research to try and find some MOOCs that supported those 9 attributes. So we went out there, tried to kind of dip into lots of content, and then promoted them to our leaders. It's quite early days, so we haven't got a lot of feedback yet, but that's how we're using them. Yeah.
So you haven't had feedback, but you haven't had an allergic reaction to this concept?
No, but I don't know how many people are actually using them, engaged in them, so that's the next step.
And did you find it easy to find those MOOCs?
I found it easy to find some topics, and then for other areas we couldn't find anything.
Great, thanks very much. Now, has anyone been doing it and had success?
The problem is distribution at a scalable level. So if you have a group of 10 managers, it's very easy to distribute to those 10 managers quickly. Hey, here's 7 MOOCs that we think are good for you. The trouble I have is, in my organization, we end up having so many different tools where we're directing different users to, that I've tried to re-centralize that. So
one web address to go to, and you can find everything learning that's related to your job. The problem is, how do you bring, the trouble I'm having is how do you bring those MOOCs into that? Because user experience, of course, is key. So Coursera has a great platform, or Future Learning has a great platform. Once you get the learner there, for me, there's a resistance to getting people there from, let's say, a Sigma's location. Does that make sense?
Interesting.
So ideally, if an LMS provider can create a catalog system where you're able then to bring those MOOCs in.
Yeah. So the fact that it's not seamless in terms of you could advertise a MOOC, and then someone has to go and create the ID and log in at this other platform, and then maybe 3 different platforms that you're advertising.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sorry, you wanted to make a point up there?
I'm late to this, so I apologise. But I was just curious about what you talked about in terms of discovery, because actually the MOOC isn't the point; it's the content inside it. So most people as consumers don't seem to have a problem with multiple apps on their devices and Google as a search, so they go into multiple places. Is there a way of servicing that content up so they can do a task search and then get at the content and then go into the MOOC rather than go to the MOOC first?
Yeah, that's it. So what we've done is we've listed individual
Next time I'll throw it to him. No, so the issue is we've come up with 25 courses within MOOCs that we think are valuable, but it's exactly that. It's this barrier of entry of, oh god, I've got to make another username with another password. Whereas,
are you able to surface the description of the content outside of the MOOC? Is it surfacing this content outside of that, or do you have to?
I had one of our really smart, nerdy hackers write a script, so they scrape all that stuff, and it's imported into our elements, but still we have that barrier of entry issue.
So we've got a MOOC hacker at the back of the room. Fantastic. So if you're not a hacker, but you want to get to some MOOCs, then there are a couple of tools that are quite interesting. So MOOC List is a great aggregator. So you can search that for topics, for start dates, and you know, I did one for a list of what I consider to be interesting L&D type MOOCs, and I found 14 that were really interesting. They cover a lot of the topics that are being talked about in this conference, for example. So, you know, and they're all university led. So you've got high quality content. And then group MOOC, which helps you join. It can help you manage your MOOC experiences, basically. So it can find other people that are on the course. And it's just, that's a really neat way. So it's like, can help you interact with MOOCs and manage more than one. So those two tools together are quite useful for presenting MOOCs to the business.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
You're talking about MOOCs, but does that include small rents?
No, these are all free. So currently, I wish my voice wasn't doing this. What we're here to talk about is the free element. That's the starting point. So
the acronyms are a bit of a distraction, to be honest, and I think as we sort of move on, we'll sort of look at maybe that's not really important, you know, as to what it actually doesn't necessarily describe what it is.
But it's how you use them. So it's interesting. This is the free stuff. And I think at the very foundation, if you were to look at the fact that you might be paying Skillsoft, Lynda.com fees, and you know how much that's costing you, and then you were to map against your content needs against the stuff that's free, that's quite interesting, because how you manage that and how you put learners through that, that's something that Sam can pick up on. That's the second. So third one is applying MOOC approaches. Now, I'm assuming now that people in this room are doing this. So these approaches that we're talking about are scaling learning, so moving it well beyond your domain, across the business, potentially outside of the business, so for recruitment, for supply chain stuff. So that's one element. The second one is social interaction, so building social interaction around content. The third is data, and what you might be collecting data that's far more sophisticated than SCORM data, and reflection, because that's another element of MOOCs that's quite interesting. So is anyone using any of those four? Are they designing in those elements into their learning experiences currently? Because when I talk about it, it's like that's the possibility here. A MOOC can enable you to get to almost like liberate your content. So, for example, leadership. I mean, I think is there a zeitgeist around leadership being something that everyone does? But that's interesting because leadership content is served up to certain cohorts within an organisation. So how about if you were to put your leadership content or open up a leadership MOOC to anyone and find out who's most motivated enough to do it? Would that be interesting in itself? But that content can straddle the whole organisation and be open to all. And it's that kind of thinking with the content. That's what we're trying to get to with scalability. And social interaction as well. is there ability for people to interact around the content that you share and your learning content? Because that is at the basis of MOOCs, really. It's all about the conversation. Not necessarily, I mean, I know that for some people that do some of the scientific MOOCs, like physics-based stuff, it's kind of solo study. But all the platforms they bake in social interaction, which you don't have to do. If you do it with your own content, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. With a MOOC, you could do that in other ways, but we'll come on to that. The third one is data. So currently, I presume lots of people are using face-to-face and e-learning data. Would that be correct? So how about if we were able to measure a lot more around the interactions of the learning experience? You have a question?
So can you interrupt?
You can interrupt. Yeah, go on.
I did.
There you go. No, it's fine. It's fine.
I don't know about anyone else. When we design content, or rather deliver it after we design it, we don't test it. And by that I mean we don't test different approaches to that content. It's kind of fairly standard for web. Anyone who comes from the web industry, marketing, web marketing, it's kind of I just wondered whether MOOCs have been used because they've got so many users, whether they've been used to A/B test content approaches, different headlines, different ways of doing testing, different content approaches, videos versus something else, etc.
I'm not aware of them actually not publishing anything around A/B testing in certain terms of content, but with different platforms definitely try different approaches, maybe not within the same course, but there's definitely a developing sort of interest in experimentation. There's a recent one called on data analytics and learning, and they set that was George Siemens, who's one of the kind of founding fathers of the MOOC world, and they were very upfront and said, well, we're going to just try loads of new stuff here. Some of it's not going to work, some of it might. So they were trying new platforms, new ways of getting people to interact. And he was kind of driven to do that because he's actually thought there'd been a real lack of people trying new things in MOOCs. He said, as a technology, it had stagnated very young in its existence, which I think was quite interesting. And in terms of the ex-MOOCs, the big Coursera platforms, I think that's probably true.
So I think it's a good point. The data is far more sophisticated in MOOCs, and it very much talks to stuff like web and marketing analytics. That's what we're talking about a lot more than the kind of, do people get from beginning to end of courses, have they answered this? That's fairly basic, and there's a lot more sophistication now. And someone mentioned XAPI, and as a standard, that provides a lot more sophistication around learner activity. And then there's reflection. How do we get reflection kind of designed in to the learning experience? It's quite difficult. Face to face it is. And you might get asked to reflect on something, and you might, by the very nature of thinking about what you've just done, you might be reflecting. But an interesting aspect of MOOCs is that they occur over time, so they might be over 3 or 4 weeks. And that enables you to, the commenting on content is a reflective process, and they are spaced out. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of thinking about how one can reflect on the content and building reflection into the experience. And I found that myself with taking MOOCs. It kind of sits in that experience in a way that it doesn't with other online learning experiences. So, has anyone run a full-on real MOOC in their organisation? It's like the granddaddy, And the thing about it is, people ask me and Sam and I how many people are doing this, and the technology has been around, but we're only just beginning to kind of get to grips with what it stands for, which is why we're doing this today. And I think there are case studies and there are big companies that are doing it. So if you Google some case studies, you'll find that Google uses it for recruitment. AT&T, Marks and Spencer did one on innovation in retail. I mean, it's happening. It's beginning to happen, and it's really interesting because they're using it for talent management, for identifying people within the organisation, attracting recruits. So you're using your content. I think it's very exciting because you could be using learning content as a part of recruitment and as a part of marketing. At that point, what the value learning brings to the organisation just kind of leaps up, I think. So it's kind of creative thinking, but there's no reason why MOOCs can't be presented to the business as a way of bringing people in, identifying people. And interestingly, if you've got people going on MOOCs who are looking to hire, and you're going on the right MOOCs, then there's no reason why you're not going to start finding people who are very talented that might fit in your organisation. So just those kind of things are worth thinking about. So I'm coming to the end of my what's kind of it's about what is a MOOC really, and I think the crux of this is in this quote by Simon Nelson. He's the CEO of FutureLearn, the MOOC platform for the Open University. I'll read it out. We don't believe that MOOCs are going to transform higher education. We believe the internet is going to transform higher education, and that MOOCs are one part of that overall transformation. Now just delete the word higher education and put in workplace learning. Basically, MOOCs are not an end in themselves, and a lot of what is written about them suggests that they are. And the whole point of what we're talking about is they shouldn't be seen as that. They should be seen as providing the closest web-like learning experiences we have yet had. And that's why they matter. So, but it's the web that's changing the way we learn, and will continue to do so, and MOOCs will be one iteration of how we do it. So it's not going to be it's not the end game at all, but it's worth thinking about how they provide really good online learning experiences.
So yeah, if we swap mics, there you go. Cool, thank you. So from the work that we've been doing this year with MOOCs, we've kind of come to the conclusion really that it's about an online social learning experience. So we're trying to simplify what it is. And we think all of these words around MOOCs and all of the press around MOOCs is largely misleading, it's confusing, it's not very helpful. So we're trying to break down to the kind of elements of what it is that creates this, what is a MOOC, what are the good bits about a MOOC, what are the bits that we can take, that we should take and apply to our practice. So to me, it's about an online social learning experience. And as Martin alluded to, they're an iteration. And what we're really getting towards is creating web-like learning experiences. And if you create content in Storyline or Captivate, I would challenge any of you to say that that's web-like. Very, very unlikely. And what do we mean by web-like? We mean like it feels like you're just using the internet. It feels like a normal web practice, you know. It's like a browser, you're being social, you're consuming content where you want it, when you want it. You can connect and collaborate and share stuff with people. This is how I think learning should be online. But I would say the first kind of step on that graph is that typical e-learning content, and we want to move towards this web-like learning experience. So, what does it take to make an online learning experience? So this was the question that we had to ask ourselves about a year ago when Curator asked us to create a MOOC for them. We hadn't created any MOOCs before. We'd been on a few. We'd had mixed experiences. I have to admit, I hadn't finished any at that point. I have now. So we kind of had an experience of what it was, and we kind of took these things and thought, what do we want to create out of this? So the most important thing really was, like any good design, is to start with the end in mind. Now, the topic that we covered was on digital curation. So it's how to be an effective digital curator. Now, that's a topic that is, we think, an essential skill for anyone working in L&D. How do you find information? How do you criticize it? How do you publicize it? How do you adapt it? But it wasn't something that a lot of people are necessarily very good at. So we had a range of options to use within Curator. Curator is a social learning platform. It's quite different. And has anyone seen Curator or used it, apart from the people I know? Yep, cool. Okay. So it's quite different to your typical online learning experience. And it gives you a range of game mechanics, a range of doing different things. So it breaks down content into learning objects, and you organize it into levels. So within a level, different bits of content get a number of points, and if you consume that content in some way, you earn the points, and if you comment on that content, you earn more points, and you have to earn a certain number of points to get to the end of the level and level up. So you can use a range of different media from anything you like, really, anything available on the web. So it's really like a browser overlay on the top, so it's that web-like learning experience, but with the social stuff connected to the content. So it's very much about driving conversation around the content. And at the end of each level, you have an end-of-level gate. It's kind of like an end-of-level boss where you have some sort of deeper challenge to do. Could be something simple like an assessment, could be about a discussion question, or it could be about contributing some sort of web link that you found that's relevant. And so these are the kind of things we had to work with to create this online learning experience. And we came up with this philosophy of three C's, essentially. So content, the content that had to drive conversation, because we wanted people to have a social experience, and you have to talk to each other if you're going to have a social experience. And the conversation should drive connection. So it's connection between the people on the course, so meeting new people, sharing new experiences, but also connection with the content, so joining the dots. And the content that we did for the first course was all curated, so we did not create anything. We had 44 learning objects, and all a complete mix of different media, so video, infographics, academic papers, blog posts, journals, all sorts of things. But every piece of content had a question associated with it, because that's the simplest way to start a conversation. You ask a question. And because of the game mechanics, you actually were forced to answer it in some ways, which sounds a bit draconian, but actually forcing yourself to reflect on something makes you think a bit more deeply. Now, you get to choose when you do that, so there is a certain element of free choice, but we found what you could find, or you may think you might find is something like that, is there were people just put, yeah, or oh, it's all right, any sort of throwaway comments just to get the points. But we didn't find that. We found people actually engaged with it really deeply and really took a lot of time to give some great comments, and there were some fantastic conversations on there. And so the idea of connection, we found that we also used Twitter. So we ran a hashtag called DCurate for the first one, and as well as people within the course connecting with each other on Twitter, we ran Twitter chats. So that was an opportunity to extend the audience and extend the conversation. And as a result of that, it drew a lot of new voices into the course and the experience, and people shared what they wanted, and then we were able to storify that and share it back into the course. So we come back to this idea of experience design. And when we sat down, we basically designed a very MOOC-like experience in that it had a start date and an end date. And that was all we really thought about. So within that time, there was the Twitter chats, there was the levels, and that was it really. And then we kept having to extend it. So it was about this time last year, and as sort of word of mouth spreads on these things, you kind of realize actually 2 weeks isn't enough, then 3 weeks isn't enough, and then we get to 4 weeks and we're like, well, we can't do this forever. So we just kind of, well, we'll just leave it open and we'll stop moderating it. We'll stop facilitating the conversation and see what happens. And actually what happened was that more people went in it after there than actually went in it during the experience. And you might think, well, that's not going to be as good an experience. It's obviously not as social an experience. But if you look at the points and the amount of contribution that people who had that second experience, the experience that they participated in, you'd actually find that of the top 50 people on the scoreboard, a higher percentage of people had that second experience rather than the live one. So although we designed one thing, it actually, people take these things and create their own experience, just as they do in the big MOOCs. People go in, take what they want, and then they go. So there was also this third element of experience around the social media. So we use Twitter partly as a kind of customer service thing, because when you're creating something like this, you have to accept that it's something different for people, and you have to offer support. So we talked about making it seamless to go from one sort of system to another. You have to be there to kind of answer these things, because it's not necessarily what people are used to. They're used to being directed a lot of the time with corporate learning. But then finally, we took the content and we wanted to make it available outside of Curator. So we used something called Pearl Trees. Pearl Trees is a curation platform where you can just pull together stuff. So we kept the format of that as it was in the course, so the levels to structure the different bits of content, and then just published it. And we've had over 8,000 views on that collection of content. So the people that have accessed the content there have had another learning experience, and they've taken their own value from it as well. So from one little sort of seed, one particular course, people have been able to have all sorts of different experiences and share it in all sorts of different ways. And that's because it's a part of the web. You couldn't do that with your SCORM content. But because it exists in the web, you can share it and repurpose it and use it and remix it, just like you can stuff on the web. So we want to look at how you might actually do that on a smaller scale. So if we take a scenario, for example, something common like coaching skills, how do you deliver coaching skills at the moment in your organisation? Anyone? Face-to-face, yeah. So what if you were to take a MOOC approach to coaching? So if you take that simple content, conversation, connection approach, you could do the same thing on your enterprise social network. So if you've got Yammer, or you've got Chatter, or anything similar like that, you create a group on there. All you have to do is collect the relevant content, distribute it, open it up to people, and invite them to come and have conversations around the content. It really can be as simple as that. And you could do the same thing on SharePoint if you had to. There's such a wide range of tools that you could use to do it. You might have a functionality in your learning management system to do that. It's about taking these approaches of, well, the value is actually in the conversation. So giving people content and then asking them to discuss it, and then maybe go away and do something. So if it's a coaching skills, you might give them a coaching model and invite them to talk about the pros and cons of it, and then say, right, go away, coach your teams, and come back and write us a short blog on the platform. Tell us how it went. What worked, what didn't, what were you struggling with? It's very simple, and it's just taking those approaches and applying them to whatever tools you've got. You might have a social intranet that lets you do that. If you haven't got any of that, then you could just go and set up a Google Plus group, a private Google Plus group, or a LinkedIn group. You could even do it via email, which, I don't know, it's maybe a stretch too far, but you could potentially do it like a distance learning course by email. So we've touched on data as well already about MOOCs. So perhaps the really truly valuable thing here is data. So Martin mentioned about how we use data for talent identification. So Google, AT&T, Intel, they use edX, Coursera to basically cream off the top 1% from the top computer science courses, and they go and approach them and give them jobs. That's great, but how does that apply to us? How can we use data more effectively? So what I'd be interested in knowing is, how do you use data at the moment? So that's just a question for you guys to discuss on your table. So as I presume you guys are learning professionals, in your role as a learning professional, what data do you provide the business, and what problems does that solve for the business? So just take a few minutes to have a chat with the person you're with about that. If we could just wrap those up, and would anybody like to share the data that they've got at the moment? Anyone proud of the data they're collecting and the massive contribution it makes to the business? Anyone want to share? Kick us off, because we are running a bit low on time, so if... hands up, come on, volunteers, one of you. Okay, yes, over there, thank you, Gare.
To start with, it are just simple data about how people experienced learning courses or whatever. When it becomes more complex, I always try to engage senior leaders and help them in looking at the learning and say something in qualitative ways about how they appreciate what was going on with their people or together with their people. But that takes quite some time to organize that.
You have to spoon feed them the data you've analyzed.
No, I give them structure, methodology, so they can gather the data and build an idea around it.
So would it be fair to say that for the majority of us, the kind of data we're collecting is really kind of bums on seats type data? You know, is anyone going far beyond that? Yeah. How are you doing that?
Well, so we know completion rates, we know how much time people are spending on, let's say, the formal learning stuff that we're facilitating. And then, you know, depending on how we measure performance in different areas of the business, whether for customer services through our customer satisfaction and kind of, let's see, their efficiency factors, we can work that back towards when have we used learning interventions. There's actually only one interesting one, I think personally, that we found, is that for our call center employees, we have a program which is called Customer Service DNA. Basically, it's getting people to understand the bigger role that they play, the bigger picture. We do that centrally. They get a Walt Disney World experience from it.
Okay.
But what we actually found, linking it back to engagement data as well, is we used to deliver at 9 months. After 9 months in the company, now we've actually shifted that to 16 months, because we see if we deliver at 16 months, we actually get another 8 months of service on average out of the customer service reps. And that pays, you know, it's not cheap to fly people from Seattle to Amsterdam, but we earn that money back just because we keep people at the business hours on.
Yeah. So I think the kind of point we're sort of driving at really is that with this concept of being a web-like learning experience, it means that you can collect data like you can collect on the web. So you go to any website, it's collecting data all the time about how you're using that site, the activities you're doing, you know, web analytics. So what if you could take that approach to learning? So you could take that approach to how people are using your content. You could take that approach to the conversations people are having online, whose opinion is being valued, whose comments are being voted up, who is contributing to the community of practice online the most. So if you take a more web-like approach, then, I'm just going to quickly talk through some of these. These are just some stats that we took from the data of 2 of the courses we did around innovation and curation. So this one was, because we want to create conversation, this looked at which of the 2 MOOCs had the most interaction. So that was around a comment that got a reply, counted as a conversation versus a comment that was just a comment. So it's just really an example of the point of the data is to ask questions of it. So you want to understand something. We wanted to understand what made a course more conversational. So here we were asking, well, does media type influence conversation? So we looked at comparing them, and you can see really no, doesn't make any difference whatsoever to the courses that we did. Does media type affect, so I think that was the volume of content, volume of comments, the last one. This was around conversation, so again, not much difference. The curation one, pretty similar. The innovation one, not much difference at all between them. And here was around the content length. So here we did see quite a strong correlation. So content that took 4 to 5 minutes led to more comments, which was fairly interesting, we thought. So we looked at, does that carry through to conversational comments as well? So again, seeing quite a strong correlation there, that the kind of content that takes 4 to 5 minutes to watch or read led to more conversation. Now there could be other factors according to that. It's just really an example of how you might use that extra data. So how could you use it to assess the quality of the program rather than just getting, you know, classic Kirkpatrick data, which hopefully we're starting to move beyond. So the problem is, if you're using different platforms, you might have quite fragmented experiences. So you might be using an enterprise social network, you might be using your intranet, you might be using SharePoint. Now, all of those things do generate data, but they might do it in different formats. So then you're creating a bit of a headache, perhaps, in how you clean that data up, how you bring it together so that you can actually ask those questions and make use of it. So it's just something to think about. The data is valuable, but you need to think about how you design it to get hold of that data and how you can actually make use of it afterwards. So yeah, so just looking at those, all those different platforms will collect data in different ways and give you different opportunities for data. So it's something to think up front before you dive in. So this is where some of the hope is in making that job simpler. So Tin Can Experience API, I'm not going to go into masses of detail on that, but it's a way for tracking learning experiences. It's a way for tracking activity online, essentially. So you can, as the gentleman at the back was talking about, they're able to track people's performance and link that back to learning. Tin Can is the Experience API. That's what that exists to do. So different platforms, some have it already. Some you have to program it in, code it in personally. But you can then track these experiences. So you can track how someone is performing. So it might be on Salesforce that you can see who the best performers are in your sales teams, and you can track back the learning experience that those people have had. And maybe they happen to be the most active people in a certain social forum, or maybe they are going on different websites and getting information from different places. So it's giving you much more informed view of the learning experience. Now, I'm not going to go into Tin Can in any great detail here, but it's something to look into in a bit more detail because it does have a lot of potential for us in terms of having a deeper understanding of the experiences that we create and how they relate to performance at work, which is ultimately our job, I think. So to just kind of wrap it up, really, it's something to think about. Where do MOOCs fit in your strategy? So if you think like learning should be social, if you think there's value in that, if you think that there's value in it being scalable, if you want to have more data available to you, if you want to make it more open to the people in your organization, then whether or not you just curate MOOCs, take MOOCs yourself, take MOOC approaches, or go and talk to your marketing department and get them to run a MOOC as an external thing, I think there is a strong place for this approach, whatever you want to call it. MOOCs, online social learning experiences, web-like learning experiences. It's just a slightly different way of thinking about online learning and learning technology. We're doing another MOOC which starts next week called Exploring Social Learning, because really MOOCs are about social learning. So to be honest, it's quite an interesting topic where there's not an awful lot written about it and there's a lot of confusion about it. So we are going to take a couple of weeks, for 3 to 4 weeks, and examine social learning in detail, but we're going to take a very social approach to it. It's a very collaborative approach. If you're interested in that, it's completely free. You can leave your email address on one of the forms on the tables, and we'll send you an invite to it before Monday. And yeah, Explore Social, that's the hashtag for that one. And if you want to get in contact with us anyway, you can do that. And you'll find various resources on that link there, that 100 resources, or you can scan the QR code. There's all sorts of background information about MOOCs if you don't know much about them. And you can find links to some of our other courses, the curation one, and all sorts of other goodness. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Yep.
When you're designing a MOOC, how much of it have you finished designing before you start running it?
It's a very good question. So the ones we've done previously, we've actually done it all. So they've been, some MOOCs, they are time released. So you might say week 1, there's a certain amount of content available, and then you get to a kind of a barrier and you have to wait for the next release. We haven't done that with the ones we've done before. So that does lead to some people racing ahead and finishing it. You might get half a dozen people who are super, super keen, and somehow they do it all in 2 weeks, and then they sort of race up the leaderboards. This next one we're doing, we are actually time releasing it, so we're doing week 1 because we want to keep everyone together, so there's more conversation, trying to keep the pack of learners together. So, and in that one, we haven't done all of the content, so we can react to it more. But even if you design most of it, you can still then go back and say, oh, well, things are going in this direction, or people aren't understanding in that area, and you can go and find new content. And because you're not authoring it in some authoring tool, and it takes lots of time to design, you can just go and find it from the web, drop it in, say why it's relevant, and it's a much faster, more agile approach to learning.
I'd just add that you could go through a MOOC that's relevant to you and your team, or a group of people in your organisation, and see what that experience is like for them as well. I think that's a really useful thing to do. It'll be the right kind of content, but it's like, what's it like to take a group of people through someone else's MOOC? Because I think that gives you quite a good feel for what that experience is like as well.
I hate to do this because I know there's a lot of discussion that could be had. The opportunity is there because there are drinks outside when I let you go in just a moment. But thank you very much, Sam and Martin. I've seen a number of presentations about MOOCs, and everybody has questions, and there's what's this, what's that, and I think we're learning about MOOCs as we go, and I think the more sessions that we go to of this kind, looking into and behind MOOCs, the more we actually understand the benefits and the bits that are coming out of them. I've sort of got a question which I'm going to think about when I go away. When I was a little boy, I was told there were 3 R's, writing, reading and arithmetic, right? I'm now learning that there are 3 C's, because I'm actually into the fact that what we're about is 21st century skills. I did a big research paper last year on what CEOs want from learning, and one of the key things they want is an ongoing development of 21st century skills. So when we get to content, conversation and connection, I think we're getting quite close to what CEOs are looking for from people who are useful to them in their organisations. Just leave that with you as a thought. So guys, thank you very, very much indeed. I think it's been a good session. Thank you everybody for your participation. We'll give them a round of applause and say thank you to them.
Thank you.
And then finally, on behalf of the conference, thank you first of all for staying to the end. Be safe on the way home. We know the weather is lousy further north and west, so just be careful, please, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next year. Hope you've had a great time at the conference, and your feedback is welcome. The online website will be there for a long time for you to continue to interact. Thanks a great deal. Bye-bye.